Welcome to Parenting Adventures, the podcast that brings clarity, compassion, and real-world solutions to the everyday challenges of raising kids. Each episode, we sit down with leading experts to unpack the issues that matter most to families today, offering evidence-based insights and practical takeaways. And if academic struggles are part of your parenting journey, Tutor Teach is here to help. Visit the link in our show notes to get started today. Now let's get into the episode.
Have you ever looked at your child's math homework and thought, this is nothing like what I learned in school? I'm your host, Lara Cordapat, and today we're joined by Dr. Brent Davis, a professor of mathematics education whose career has bridged real classrooms and groundbreaking research. Dr. Davis began his career teaching middle school mathematics before completing his PhD in mathematics education and curriculum studies at the University of Alberta. Since then, he has held some of the most distinguished positions in the field, including the Canada Research Chair in Mathematics Education at the University of Alberta, the David Robitaille Chair at the University of British Columbia, and now the Distinguished Research Chair and Workland Research Professor at the University of Calgary. In this episode, Dr. Davis reflects on what he learned in those early classroom years, how math education has shifted from memorization toward deeper understanding, and why parents sometimes feel left behind. We dig into why math keeps changing, or not, how new approaches like inquiry-based learning are shaping the way kids think, and what parents can do when they want to help but aren't sure how. Dr. Davis also unpacks the idea of whether kids are math people and how parents can nurture confidence, curiosity, and persistence even when the methods feel unfamiliar. Whether your child is breezing through math or bumping into roadblocks, this conversation is packed with insights that will help you see math education and your child's potential in a whole new light. You've spent years studying how people learn math, from classrooms to the complexity of how knowledge grows. For parents meeting you for the first time, can you share a little bit about your background, what drew you to this work?
I like starting my answers to questions like this by talking about my early childhood. My mother was a grade 1 teacher in northern Alberta, a relatively small community, and it was in an era that the neighborhood kids came over to the house when they were struggling with their homework. Mom would invite them in and help them through it. So I have these memories from the time I was tall enough that when standing on my tippy toes, I could see over the edge of the table what was going on, cluing into how she was helping these kids learn to read and to do math. The math stuff I found fascinating from really early on. Like from a very young age, I want to say grade 2 or 3, she started using me as a tutor for the younger kids and sometimes older kids that would pop over to the house. Like, oh, I need to cook supper. Can you help this kid with his addition? So that has been built into my experience from my oldest memory. It just seemed like a natural thing to pursue a career in mathematics education as I moved through school. And that's what I did.
Something like a childhood core memory like that is really what starts it all. And also they always say that teaching others is the best way to learn yourself. And so every time you were teaching other kids in the neighborhood math, you were reinforcing those skills for yourself.
Well, and that was certainly the case. One of the things I noticed immediately in my early teaching career is that I thought it was some kind of strange intuition, but I realized it was just 20 years of training by the time I started teaching, that I could feel immediately where a child was not understanding something. What particular discernment are you missing? And it's usually just one or two little things that mess up the whole concept. Like you are just not noticing that this sign and this sign aren't the same. So let's pay attention to this detail, and boom, things got better. That's one of the really powerful things of educators engaging as tutors before they engage as classroom teachers. Just that opportunity to spend slow time one-on-one paying attention to what one person is thinking. I actually had 15 or 20 years of that before I stepped into a classroom as a teacher.
What you just said is really represented in Tutor Teach's team, where we're really encouraging those young minds that are pursuing their accreditation to come and tutor with us, because it does teach you skills, interpersonal skills, but of course, skills. And students have really interesting questions that can even trump the most resilient teacher on the team. And so to keep learning and keep diving into that.
You know, if I could design a teacher education program, specify the qualifications to enter into teacher education, that would be one of them, that you have some significant amount of one-on-one tutoring experience so you know what it means to actually listen to the sense a learner is making.
Agreed 100%. And plus, when you stand in front of a class of 30 kids, You don't know what those individual problems are, but you can tap back into when you did the one-on-one tutoring to really be able to pull out what those themes were to be a better teacher in front of a group of kids versus one-on-one.
So I hope we circle back to this because this is actually the center of my current research and the research for the past 15 years. It's how can we structure whole class teaching in ways that mimic the advantages you get on the one-to-one tutor. There are ways to monitor everybody's thinking in real time. I think you're going to ask me a question about what I think the big developments are, and that is, I think, the big development of the moment.
Yeah, interesting. So let's take a step back in time. When you think about how math looked when you were a student, what's the biggest difference you see between then and now?
I hate to say it, but I don't see a lot of difference. Where I do see a big difference is in possibility and things that are available to us, but I don't see a lot of difference in what is actually happening in classrooms. I still see teachers distracted by a lot of noise. Undo this and not that, and this is a good idea, that's a bad idea. I still see a dominance of classroom practices that lack a compelling research base. I still see educators entangled in senseless debates about, for example, procedural competence versus deep understanding, or the role of rote practice versus dwelling on rich problems. These things should have been resolved. We have the neuroscience, we have the psychology, we have the sociology to help us around them, but they're still dominating classroom debates, and they're still holding things in a strange place. When I began teaching in the 1980s, dating myself,
All good.
it was a moment of the same debates were in place. We were caught up in trying to make sense of should we be doing this and should we be doing that. And parents were coming to parent teachers saying, this wasn't the way I was taught. I don't know how to help my child. What should I do? These sort of 40 years have passed and we're asking exactly the same question. I had to characterize things. We are asking slightly different questions and having slightly different debates, but the same unsettled turmoil is kind of holding us back from engaging in what we know how to do. Like there is sound research, but there's so much noise that educators have a hard time cutting through it.
And what about technology? Like, has technology impacted the way that the materials absorbed, the way that the materials approached and delivered?
Yeah, that's something that's all over the map. If you take a rote practice, you need to memorize these things to master them attitude, then having a calculator or a computer beside you is not going to make much difference to your learning. Or if you take an attitude that doing mathematics well is being able to answer this whole sheet of paper, whole sheet of questions in 1 minute, then it sort of doesn't matter if the technology is there. You know, it's a good question because technology in some classrooms has opened up wildly interesting vistas of exploration in mathematics. We can now ask questions that we couldn't ask a few decades ago because, I mean, they were just too calculation heavy, required some visual imagery that just wasn't available. We have that now. But for the most part, the curriculum documents haven't changed that much. The tests that drive what teachers think you need to know haven't changed that much. Huge opportunities presented that resulted in some meaningful change, but not a revolution that some of us were hoping for when computers started to come on the scene like 30 years ago.
One question I have in mind is we teach students at Tutor Teach across Canada, and we'll often get, are you teaching the Ontario curriculum? Are you teaching the BC curriculum? And so there's variances, specifically a lot in science anyways, when they're teaching the subjects kind of at different grade levels than, say, in Alberta. Is there something that could be a little bit more universal about how that's approached from coast to coast?
This is a difficult question. I'm not quite sure what the value would be in having it altogether too similar. There was a time not too long ago when curricula were virtually interchangeable across provinces. You really couldn't tell which province you were in. When I was teaching junior high school, I was using the same textbook that a friend was using in Nova Scotia. There has been a divergence in curricula, especially over the last decade, but it's not such a massive divergence that says, you know, that they are tweaks. This concept is in grade 7 in Alberta, but it's in grade 4 in Prince Edward Island. There are little things that shifted around. For the most part, they're more alike than different.
Yeah, I always think that's interesting when a parent asks if you have a teacher who can teach this curriculum. They have to be able to. Physics is physics and chemistry is chemistry.
In mathematics and the sciences, you'll find much more similarity across the provinces. There are wild differences in the humanities course.
I can see that for sure. A lot of parents worry, if my child isn't learning math the way I did, will they miss out on the basics? How do you reassure families who feel like the fundamentals are slipping away?
One of the frustrating or senseless debates that is out there, as I mentioned, is between procedural competence and deep understanding. Where that debate is taken too literally or too seriously, there is a risk of not developing competencies that every child is more than capable of developing. Every single domain of human expertise relies on practice. And very often you will find this debate, not so much a debate, but a kind of an assertion in school math that, well, rote practice kills interest in mathematics. Why would that be specific to mathematics? It doesn't seem to kill interest in baseball or hockey or music or baking cakes.
That's a good point.
Why would we worry about it here? Rote practice is actually empowering and enabling if it's done meaningfully and in context. It is impossible to be good at mathematics if you haven't got some things at your fingertips. If in grade 9 you can't factor 60 in a few seconds, you're going to be debilitated. And that's not fair. To parents who are worried about this seems to be different, I would say press toward practice. Press toward helping your child develop familiarity and competence. And each child is different. Your strategies for doing that might have to be nuanced, but it's vital to success in mathematics to have a background of almost intuitive familiarity with operations and calculations as you move on.
Yeah, we always say consistency is king. It's really the repetition. Now, rote memorization is tricky because there can be often a lack of comprehension or deep comprehension when
Yeah, I always try to attach the word meaningful to that phrase. It's why are we doing this when we like, it's okay, 7 times 8. 7 times 8 on its own is kind of a useless thing. And I have had, when I was teaching junior high school, I had kids who could say that 7 times 8 is 72 and not have a clue what that meant. That's work. So there is this coupling of rote competence and deep knowledge. The neuroscientific and psychological research is unambiguous about this. These things are co-entangled. They complement one another. You can't have one without the other. So why are we having this argument over which we should emphasize? Always attach the word meaningful to any kind of word mention of practice.
well, and of course, like you said, you talked about the baking and the piano. It goes so deep for me. If I speak French, if I go out of practice in speaking French, my French is not sharp. I lose my words. I have to think a little hard, hold my sentence together. But if I speak French with my kids every day and their teachers and their kids, like their friends' parents, my French is as sharp as it can be. And so there's so much intentionality behind that. There's a goal behind it.
And you can replace French with knitting and you can replace French, but as soon as you replace it with math, you'll have people stand up and say, no rote practice. Is what?
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe it's just because they don't want to practice math.
Who knows? I think it is summoning histories of frustration. Why I try to attach the word meaningful. My experience has been is that children and adults are willing to engage with something they experience as meaningful, but are highly resistant to think, yes, 8 times 9 is 72 and blue whales are blue. It's just...
But I also think that part of the reason maybe this meaningful practice and whatnot might be avoided by some is sometimes it's all about the teachers that you've had or the approach to the instruction or the excitement. Like, so for example, one of my high school math teachers loved math. Like she just was obsessed with it and she made stories about it. And so she made the learning really fun because you could feel her passion for it. It wasn't just like 1 + 1 = 2. It was, you've got one of these, and she's like, almost putting songs and poems together where she's doing what it takes to get kids to buy in to that concept, and that lent itself to being able to transfer it at exam time. And so that approach to instruction and the passion behind it as not just being numbers on paper, but how significant those numbers are and how they affect real life and being able to apply them in real life examples goes such a long way, I believe, for pretty much every learner out there.
Absolutely true. The converse is also unfortunately true based on the research I've seen that yes, your infectious love for math will be transferred, so will your abhorrence for math. Children are sponges of emotional content. How you feel about a subject matter will be registered, and this is one of the big things that we struggle with.
So even if parents don't totally get the new strategies, what are some simple ways they can still support their child's confidence and curiosity in math?
My advice there varies according to the child and the resources that you have available. Following up on the question that was just asked, topic that we were just discussing on teaching teachers transferring their feelings about mathematics. First and foremost, kind of sort of be positive and enthusiastic about it and be interested in it. Try to project a curiosity and a wonder and engage with things. I worked with one parent some years ago who had horrible school math experiences by her account. And guess what? Her teenage daughter was having exactly the same experience. So I was trying to working with the daughter, tutoring, and not making a lot of progress. And then I decided I'm going to take on the mother on this one. And when the mother changed her attitude and started to be positive and actually sat in on some of the tutoring sessions and learned math with us, it transformed everything. To make this sort of a space of curiosity, not a space of torture, she took it a step farther, deliberately trying to find places in the world where these concepts were appearing or could be used to make sense of. That's not always easy to do. This was grade 8 and grade 9 math, and some of the concepts get a little bit abstract. Nonetheless, she was able to locate, to engage in conversation with. So that would be my first advice. It's certainly easy to do at the elementary level. Another parent I worked with, pretty substantial learning disability issues, and was having trouble just learning how to count. Numbers appeared everywhere in their house. When they climbed the stairs, the digits were there, and they climbed the stairs together. And let's climb the stairs by twos today. And everything became number. Within about 2 years, was at grade level and was ahead of grade level for the rest of her schooling career. Like, this was one of the moments of, I'm not sure I can help you, given what I observe in terms of learning disabilities. This child is actually going to be adept at mathematics. It is much more about attitude and engagement than it is about specific pedagogy or teaching methods or curriculum emphasis.
I think that's a great takeaway, and it's so true. I mean, even for me as a parent, I almost am learning the world again through the eyes of my own children, through our travel and our stories. And one of our kiddos is really, really big into STEM, and hearing him dive into it, that's just not the way my brain works as much. I'm more humanities based minded. And so I feel like I'm learning, get initiation for the math that perhaps I didn't really buy into as much as I should have as a child. But what you just said is like a custom way of teaching a child. And so involving it in the day, like, you're cutting a piece of pizza. Right now you have a whole pizza and we're cutting it into 4 pieces, and you take one piece, like really finding ways to make it a subconscious learning experience to bridge the gap from at home learning to in classroom learning.
One of my mantras when I'm working with pre-service teachers is that mathematics, especially at the lower grades that we introduce, should come as a description of something that's already familiar. It shouldn't arrive as a bunch of symbols and now we go to the world and look for meaning. No, it should be describing something you've already done. So cutting pizza, for example, there's a good time to start throwing in, okay, this is 4 pieces. What do we call those pieces? Now, if I cut all those in 2, how many pieces do I have, and what do we call those? As opposed to, okay, an eighth. The 1 is the numerator, the 8 is the denominator. This tells us how many we have. This tells us the size. Let's see if we can find something in the world that's cut into 8 pieces. Do we learn that way? We learn language by encountering things and naming them. Why wouldn't we learn math by encountering things and naming them?
We often hear that today's approaches are meant to prepare kids for real-world problem solving and future career. From what you've seen, are these methods really doing that, or are parents right to be skeptical?
I won't dive into a deep history of how we got to the mathematics curriculum we got to. I will say a couple things about that. The original impetus for elementary school mathematics and the topics we see in elementary school mathematics came at the start of the Industrial Revolution, when schools were invented to keep children on the labor market and to keep them busy while their parents were at work. So what was the job of the schools at that time? And it was really only elementary schooling, because people went to work early adolescence or sooner. The job of the school was to provide minimal literacies, reading, writing, arithmetic, that people would need as they entered the job market. That's where the word basics comes from. Basics has nothing to do with the basics of mathematics. It is the basic literate needs of a person of the 1700s and 1800s. So there's nothing basic to mathematics about plus, minus, times, divide. That's a school invention.
But you're right, that's exactly what it's called. Basic math. Yeah.
But it's not basic math. We're locked into this now. That's what the basics are. That's what we're seeking to develop. The original basics were precisely about that. Let's face it, the world we are trying to educate children into, we can't predict with the same fidelity that they could in the 1700s about what adults would need. In fact, we stopped being able to do that about 50 years ago. Sort of the pace of societal evolution just picked up so much that we could no longer confidently say, this is the skill set you'll need as adults. There was sort of a shift in the educational mindset of we're not preparing people with the skills they need. We are preparing people with the attitudes and dispositions they need. And yet the curriculum didn't change much. So it's just, are we duping ourselves? I've talked to many, many people at cocktail parties and elsewhere. As soon as I say, I'm a mathematics educator, oh, I hated math. One of the consistent themes across all those conversations of, there isn't a thing I learned in high school that I still use. Well, let's think about that for a second. Why might that be? Nobody says that about their elementary school content, but why would they? That was deliberately designed. These are the basic skills you need for life.
It's foundational, yeah.
Yeah, but what is high school about? Well, that was a different enterprise. That was about preparing you for university. I actually used everything I used in my high school mathematics because I studied mathematics at university. Now, did I use it outside university? Maybe not. We have found ourselves in this odd situation that we can't get out of. Math is this necessity to pursue mathematics and to pursue mathematics adjacent discipline at the same time as we are teaching things that we know we won't need ever. I am utterly complicit in this project as I teach teachers how to teach students to perpetuate these practices. At the same time, they're going, I wonder if we're ever going to break out of the mold of schooling that was set in place 300 years ago. There are some wonderful and relevant topics of mathematics, especially to the circumstances we see in the world today. But we have some wonderful mathematics that allow us to perceive aspects of the world we need to be attending to. One of the basic operations, I think, for this era, for example, we talk a lot about adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. But I think the critical calculation competency right now is exponentiation. Everything that we see happening is in this accelerating exponential curve that people don't really understand well because our minds aren't fitted to exponentiation. But ocean acidification, the decline of the ozone layer, the plastification of the ocean, temperature increases, that all of these are operating exponentially, and we are not equipped to interpret that. Why is this not a new basic for the era? This is where we find ourselves. And, if I realize that not a lot of parents have this inclination or the time on their hands to do this, but one of the places that parents, I think, could be a powerful influence is lobbying with politicians and others to really rethink the curriculum for the era in which we live. Why are we still teaching mostly the same things that were decided 300 years ago? That's not the world we live in. Why are we so preoccupied with mastering the things that we needed to master long before we had the technology to take the load off for us? Why aren't we exploring the possibilities that are in front of us rather than being held in place by that what's behind us? And again, I acknowledge my complicity. I am preparing teachers to teach that 300-year-old curriculum.
Exactly. You're perpetuating.
I am.
So at the top of the episode, you mentioned a focal point of your research, and the question was, how can we structure classroom teaching in a way so we can get the advantages of one-on-one tutoring? So what conclusions have you drawn? How can we use that today?
One way into this question is, does one-to-one tutoring, what are the advantages of it? One of the big advantages is that realize the importance of just dealing with a little information at a time. You would not give a 15-minute lesson on adding fractions in one-to-one tutoring. You would pick an example and you would look at some aspect of it and you would immediately check for the person's understanding. That's two things so far. You'd really limit the amount of information at any given moment and you would immediately check for understanding. A third advantage, offer a number of questions, rapid fire, to ensure that the person really understands and to bolster confidence. One of my favorite new topics in the science of learning it's called the 85% rule. The rate of success that we should be aiming at, lower than that, and people start to wonder, like, if you're only getting half the questions right, you're wondering, am I clued in? What am I missing? But if you get 100% of the questions right, you're thinking, oh, cakewalk, I don't need to pay attention. At about 85%, we are confident that we know what's going on. At the same time, is there, what went on there? I need to be paying attention. We have the confidence to proceed and the curiosity to hang on. Within the tutoring setting, it's really easy to maintain that. This was something that I think comes natural to just about all tutors. They have a sense of when they're losing the kid, so they start asking questions that they know will bring them back in. They have a sense of when the kid's being bored, they will ask a question that presents a sudden challenge. We've seen good tutors, that's what they do. Now, how can you bring those three things to class? Thing number one, limit the amount of new information. I think perhaps the biggest mistake in traditional mathematics pedagogy, probably the most common example, teaching how to add fractions. I did that so badly as a teacher. Perfect lesson, absolutely flawless with great examples and visuals, and took the children through, and I had it done in 12 minutes. And then, okay, it's seat work time. And then I spent the rest of the 40-minute class running from desk to desk, trying to figure out what this student missed and what that student, and they all missed different things. Why? Because I downloaded too much information too fast and didn't check. I wasn't able to do what a tutor is able to do. So this is what we've been focusing on. We call it the Math Minds Project. We've been really lucky to be really well supported and have to be able to work with lots of school districts and teachers on it to develop a pedagogy that is structured around really well engineered resources to say, okay, here's something you need to notice. Now, let me check to see that everybody notices it. And we have different strategies, holding up whiteboards or having exercises in front of them. Quickly scan the entire room. Do not move on to the next thing you need to notice until you know everybody's noticed this one.
That's just it. It's such a checkpoint.
Yeah. And so, I mean, the big thing in this is having access to resources that parse the necessary noticing for you, because there's a lot of work involved in this. That was the big thing. And you're familiar with Jump Math, I think. That's the resource we use. Tang Math that does the same thing. But the critical thing here is there's a difference between things you need to notice to put the concept together and steps. This is not do this and then do this and then do that. No, I mean, that just sets a child up for failure. Memorizing sequences of steps is really, really hard. However, noticing things that you need to notice in order to do something. And this is where Jump and Tang Math excel. You need to notice these details. And when you have enough noticing, the right opportunity to weave those noticings together, suddenly the concept pops. Suddenly, I don't have to explain how to add fractions because it's just obvious. I've noticed all these details. So there is this way of teaching. It requires a well-engineered resource, mimicking those three details from tutor. Deal with just a little information at a time, check for understanding with each noticing, and offer multiple questions to ensure that the student is experiencing lots of success as you're going along. And it sounds like it might be tedious and slow, but in fact, in well-structured classrooms, when they start getting the flow of things, it goes faster.
And it doesn't leave any student behind, which is really the biggest problem too. There's so many gaps, but I really resonate with that because when I was in high school, like tutoring obviously now more publicly kind of like acknowledged, I guess you could say. When I was a kid, it wasn't as many options, but my cousin was actually getting his PhD in math and he was living with us because he was doing his university here, and he would sit down with me and do my math with me. And it was like those true aha moments. I knew that no matter how that was presented to me in class, I never would have understood it that way. Broke it down in bite-sized pieces, took his time with me, which is the benefits of tutoring, and did not move on to the next thing until he was sure that I was sure. And that's exactly what we always tell parents are saying, like, how do you guys tutor? That's how we tutor. We make sure that the foundation is strong before we build the house. Don't just build the house on a shaky, gappy foundation.
Things that my mother used to say to me mockingly is, I taught it, they just didn't learn. It was a regular part of our conversations whenever I said something stupid about teaching or learning. It was a reminder that you haven't taught anything if they haven't learned anything. That's kind of foundational to why do we have this press to move through the curriculum? We know why we have this press. I mean, there is this demand that teachers cover everything. You have this culture of it is possible to teach something and have no one learn. That makes no sense in my experience, thanks to my mother. But I appreciate how that is part of the culture of conventional contemporary teaching. My job is to teach. Your job is to learn. Hopefully those things come together. No, like those things should never have come apart.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. And it's true that everyone learns so differently, and you can't expect a teacher to be able to adapt to 30 different ways of brain working. We've got to find a way that puts all those kids, those students on the same page, meaningful way that gives them the tools they need to retain the information and apply it.
And we have it to precisely that. I mean, it's not so much that everybody learns differently. It's that everybody has a different repertoire of experience coming into the classroom. So my first job as a teacher is to ensure that each learner has adequate access to what I'm hoping they will notice. I have to provide the necessary experiences to have them notice before I move on to the next noticing. I don't much subscribe to the acknowledge, absolutely, everybody learns differently. But the bigger thing that teachers have control over is that we are limited in our learning to our background experience. We can't learn beyond our experience. Okay, my job is to frame your experience so this noticing is available to you.
Like you said, you used the word psychology earlier. I see there's a lot of psychology behind the student absorbing and learning the materials in mathematics and in any subject really. And then also the teacher also brings in their own experiences too. And so there's a lot of psychology there and how they approach the instruction and how they take their own personal and professional experiences, the way they, were taught in university and things like that, and how they bring that to the classroom as well. So, for families who want to feel more equipped, what are some of the best resources? Well, you've already recommended some great resources, but other than those, are there any books, websites, or even simple day-to-day practices that you can, in addition to the ones that you've already mentioned earlier?
Those would be my go-tos. I would be more inclined to address this topic by trying to do what to stay away from.
Okay, let's go there.
Well, and it's all captured in the word meaningful. There's a lot of schlock out there. People are pressing that this is the answer to your mathematics learning woe. Be careful with online rote practice things. Be careful with exercise books that focused on manipulation of symbols and filling in blank. The important direction in the learning of mathematics, especially in the early years, is from experience to representation, not from representation to experience. So those things that are symbol heavy for young children, just not appropriate to the way that kids make sense of the world. They become more appropriate as you move further on in the mathematics learning experience. But the immediate thing is make sure that people have the experiences that might be interpreted through the mathematics.
And what about obviously hot topic AI?
Still thinking through where that might go. AI and the teaching of mathematics, I think there's a lot of hope. Like I'm seeing some promise, playing with some colleagues right now in how do we engineer prompts to help AI structure lessons for teaching. So far, AI, in our experience, is not very good at parsing concepts to help present young learners. And that's actually a feature of expertise in general. Like one of the reasons that experts often make really bad teachers is because their knowledge is so tightly integrated that they are unable to parse the noticing that you might need at that moment. They don't notice what they know. In order to be a good teacher, you have to know what you know in fine-grained detail. AI is right now, it is not yet able to, I think it will get there fairly quickly, but our experience of trying to engineer prompts to help prepare teachers is that it's not quite there in knowing what it knows behind a concept. And that makes sense. I mean, the current AI versions of AI, these large language models, are based on take 100,000 lessons on adding fractions, divide by 100,000, and there's your lesson. You are only going to get a repetition of what we think we already know in this version. You are not going to get a fine-grained parsing of what humans need to notice in order to understand the concept. So we're still reliant on other resources. I have hope for AI. It will get there, and I think hopefully in short order.
I'm sure it will. Well, I think that this has been really, really informative, and I think that parents will step back into their child selves because of your story right at the top of this episode about what brought you into math. We all have a psychology behind learning math, and like you said, a lot of people, I don't do math. I'm not good at math, but you do math, and it's a dialogue. There's just so many layers to it, and I think that you really addressed them beautifully, and you shared a lot of insight. So I really appreciate the time that you took to share your expertise and hopefully make parents feel a little bit better and stronger in their roles as parents, same with teachers, and that students are capable of anything.
Thank you for that. That prompts me to add one more thing. But the world that we inhabit, it has been so heavily mathematized. I'm sitting in a perfectly rectangular room right now. All of the pictures on the wall are perfect rectangles. It should be easy to teach mathematics in the worlds that we have constructed around ourselves, in these spaces that are defined by mathematical concepts. That goes back to what can parents do? Parents can highlight the world that mathematics has structured for us.
great advice. And you're right. Right when you said that, I started looking around to see, am I in a rectangular room?
Yeah, you are. And I see lots of rectangles and straight lines behind you. That is our mathematics structuring our world.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing that last tidbit for parents. I think that that's helpful. And parents sometimes underestimate how useful they can be and how involved they can be in their kids' learning experience, help uplift them in their own confidence. And so I appreciate all the words of advice and wisdom that you've given, and that you're doing such impactful and amazing forward-thinking work.
Thank you.
That's a wrap on this episode of Parenting Adventures. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you're walking away with fresh insight and a little more confidence for your parenting journey ahead. And if you're looking for academic support, head to tutorteach.ca to learn how we're here for families just like yours. Until next time.